All right. Good morning. I'm not used to saying good morning here. Good morning. Thank you for your patience on what is a very busy news day. We're delighted that you could join us for this press conference on the launch of the 2023 Financing for Sustainable Development Report, Financing Sustainable Transformations. We have online from London, I believe, the Deputy Secretary General, Amina Mohammed, and we have here in the room Assistant Secretary General in Odessa, Navid Hanif, and with him is Shari Spiegel, also from the Department of Economic and Social Affairs. We will let the DSG make some opening remarks, and then we'll go to the Q&A. DSG, we can see you and hear you, so you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Steph, and thank you, colleagues. Great to see you, Navid and Sherry. First, before we go into the launch of the report, I'd like to say a few words in solidarity with the women and girls in Afghanistan. As you know, earlier this year, I was there. I joined the Secretary General in strongly condemning the Taliban's decision to ban Afghan women from working with the UN in Afghanistan. It's a clear violation of our fundamental human rights of women. I have met our female staff members, and they're essential for UN's work, including in the delivery of life-saving assistance. And some national colleagues have already experienced restrictions on their movements. The UN, we reiterate that both Afghan women and men are essential to all aspects of our work, and it's taking all possible measures right now to support our national female staff at this difficult time. UN national female staff will continue to receive their salaries, and posts of women and staff will not be backfilled by women. The participation of female staff in the humanitarian response is essential if the UN is to reach populations in need of safety and effectively with principled and quality assistance. Our leadership at the UN is continuing to engage with the Taliban de facto authorities as well as neighboring countries. In fact, we're in meetings this morning with the Minister of Foreign Affairs. Until additional clarification is received, the UN is instructing all of our national staff, men and women, not to report to the office. The UN continues to remain committed to assisting our Afghan people, 2/3 of whom are 23 million people in need of life-saving assistance, including 20 million people who are food insecure, 6 million of whom are one step away from famine. And I understand that a little later you will hear more at the UNAMA noon briefing. Let me close by reminding the world that we do have a 2023 Afghan humanitarian response plan. It's currently the largest single country appeal in the world. And so we are urging all our partners to stand in unity with the women and girls and the people of Afghanistan by ensuring this funding gets to them. On a personal note, I am outraged. I am terribly troubled by the fact that in the month of Ramadan, that what we get from the Taliban is a strike against the teachings and the belief of Islam. The Holy Quran and the Hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam allows and gives rights to women on education for work. Khadija, the wife of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, was a merchant. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam was an employee. The jihad was funded by the funding from a woman. And I think it is not at this time when we are to be closer to God that we strike against the women of Afghanistan. These are women who are mothers, their sisters, their daughters, their grandmothers, their wives, and it is clearly a very troubling time, and we continue to stand by the women and the girls of Afghanistan. So with that, we felt that this was really important. We said this, but we are here to launch our report to present the 2023 Financing for Sustainable Development Report. In producing this report, the UN Department of Economic and Social Affairs has collaborated with more than 60 of our UN and international agencies and institutions, and they've done this through an interagency task force on financing for development. So you will see clear buy-in to the outcomes of this report. We're nearly 8 years since the adoption of the Addis Ababa Action Agenda and the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. We gavelled through the Addis Ababa Action Agenda before the 2030 Agenda, so it is a very important part of it. Yet halfway to the 2030 deadline, progress towards the SDGs is clearly eroding before our eyes. We've got a lot of cascading global crises, from COVID to the impacts of war in Ukraine, to the escalating climate emergency, and all have battered our countries and developing economies in particular. Tighter global financial conditions have been devastating for countries with crushing debt burdens, and recent bouts of banking instability in developed countries, though not yet a systemic crisis, further raise global risk levels. The global financial system has currently failed to protect developing countries in this time of unprecedented crises, in part because it was never designed with their interests in mind, and that's very many decades ago. Developed countries adopted expansionary fiscal and monetary policies that have enabled them to invest in recovery, returning them to pre-pandemic growth paths. Meanwhile, financing constraints continue to prevent developing countries from responding from these crises and investing in sustainable development. The great finance divide that the task force reported on last year's risks becoming a lasting sustainable development divergence. As always, it is the poorest and most vulnerable that suffer first and worst. At current trends, we've got 574 million people, nearly 7% of the world's population will be trapped in extreme poverty by 2030. This year, a record 339 million people will require humanitarian aid, and that's 1 in every 23 people on our planet. In the face of these unprecedented challenges, we really must act with greater urgency and determination. We need a two-track approach. First, we must do the most with what we have to provide the needed relief. Second, and simultaneously, we must push for reform of the international financial system to make it equitable, resilient, and accessible to everyone. We will not solve today's challenges by relying on a system that's helped to create them. We currently need to rebuild global cooperation and find the solutions to our current crises in multilateral action. As the FSDR 2023 shows, industrialization has historically been an engine of growth. It has created jobs, and there has been technological advancement. New green sustainable industrial policies can help strengthen excuse me, a call's coming through, can help strengthen our domestic productive capacities. It can support the low carbon transitions, and it can create decent jobs and certainly enhance resilience. Together with other policies and supported by integrated national planning, we see that they can lay the foundation for new green industrial age that is inclusive, and sustainable energy and food systems, and faster, broader progress towards the SDGs, a further investment. The report is setting out 2 actions that are crucial. First, the international community must urgently scale up development cooperation and boost SDG investments, including through a large-scale SDG stimulus. This SDG stimulus includes a 3-pronged call for action that is focused on tackling the high cost of debt and rising risks of debt distress. We have over 60 countries, as I would say, on debt row, massively scaling up long-term financing for development, and expanding contingency financing to countries in need. Second, the current international financial architecture must be made fit for purpose. We're already seeing the biggest rethink of international finance, monetary, trade, and tax systems since the 1940s. And we have a window of opportunity to enact real and meaningful change. But the conversation remains fragmented. The different strands need to come together and be fully aligned with the SDGs, with climate action, and achieving the just transitions for everyone. Next week, finance ministers and central bank governors will meet in Washington. We will also see from the 17th of April the ECOSOC Financing for Development Forum that will convene here in New York, followed by the SDG Summit and the high-level dialogue on financing for development in September. These are critical opportunities for us to raise the bar, create the momentum for stakeholders to come together to secure our common future. To prevent a lost decade for sustainable development, we really do have to deliver on the sustainable development goals that were a promise to the world. In a nutshell, we do have multiple shocks to the system, including the war in Ukraine. We see this pushing people and countries into poverty, inflation, not the equal access to money, and money more expensive. We see 345 million people facing acute insecurity through putting their lives and livelihoods in immediate danger. And I underscore, lives and livelihoods go together. The change for those food systems, investments in energy transition and green jobs. And we say that the SDGs today are in emergency mode, and we need the solutions for the longer term prevention. SDG stimulus, it is a solution and a response that we offer to the world for financing development, including $500 billion a year, and of course the debt relief. Now I'm happy, together with my colleagues Navid and Shari, to take any questions that you may have. Thank you.
Great. We'll first go to Margaret Bashir, Voice of America.
Hi, DSG, and to the rest of our panel, good morning. Thanks for doing the briefing. DSG, you sort of preempted me a little bit. I was going to ask you about the spring meetings at the World Bank next week. Can you just, are you attending by any chance, or is the SG going? And
yes, no.
You will.
Will.
She's adjusting. Oops, we lost you.
I'm adjusting. The back to go.
Can you hear us?
Okay.
Should I keep going?
Yes, I can.
Okay.
Yes, I can.
Are you going to attend the meetings, and what are you going to ask for specifically in terms of financing for the SDGs? Like, are you going to make a big pitch for them there? And back to Afghanistan, could you tell us, are you encouraging them to continue to work? I mean, you're saying you're not going to abide by the edict, so are you telling them to still come to work? And in that case, are you putting them in any danger?
Thank you very much for both those questions. Yes, I will be going up to DC with colleagues that will be joining me from the UNDP and DESA. We will be attending many of the meetings that will look at the reform of the World Bank, but in particular just looking for those resources, the means of implementation to see the SDGs delivered, and what sort of announcements will we be looking to the MDBs to make in September. We will convene a meeting around the SDG stimulus with ministers of finance to make sure they understand those three components and the necessity for us to get behind the debt crisis that is currently emerging, but also to look at liquidity and to see the framing in the shorter term with what we can do with the balance sheets of the World Bank and more money into the system dispersed for climate action for the SDGs. So yes, quite a number of activities. Of course, our representation in DESA and UNDP will be at the Development Committee. For Afghanistan, quite clearly, as I've said often, when you don't know and there is such an unpredictable environment that could be incredibly harmful to our women, Afghan women, our nationals who work with the UN, then you put them out of harm's way. And that's to ask them to work from home. And that we will continue to do until we get better clarification of how far and wide-reaching this initial reactions are from the de facto authorities of women not coming to work at the UN and other international agencies.
But how do you work from home when you're actually handing out packages of aid and assistance to households?
Well, in this particular case, the work that the UN and the mission has done together with the de facto authorities on the humanitarian side has enabled our NGOs and many of those who work in the field to do so. Of course, it's unpredictable. We never know when they're going to stop it. In this case, it affects women who are working within the mission, and so they are backstopping the support to those that are in the field.
Deputy Secretary General James Bass from Al Jazeera. Staying with Afghanistan, clearly one of the problems is that when you're speaking to people in Kabul and even in Kandahar, you're not necessarily speaking to the persons or, in fact, the person who is making the final decision. So what is your message to the Taliban leader, to their emir, Hibatullah Akhundzada?
You're absolutely right. The messages in Kabul and Kandahar are different. The message to the emir is that he really needs to consider what the teachings of Islam are. They do not prevent women from working. They do not prevent them from going to school. And in this holy month of Ramadan, I would ask him to reconsider the actions that they've just taken and to restore the rights of women and girls in Afghanistan.
Thank you. Thanks for the briefing, and apologies staying on Afghanistan as well, given that it's the news of the day. The United Nations has been saying you still don't have this in writing, this order. So how is this being communicated? Why all of a sudden is the Foreign Ministry deciding to enforce this? How was it communicated to them? And how do you think this might affect funding? What have donors said to you? The appeal's only less than 5% funded at the moment. I mean, how bad is this going to get?
Well, I would hope, starting from the premise of the donors, that they would not step back. This is not punishing the Taliban. This is punishing the people of Afghanistan if we don't get those resources to people who are in need in the field. And I know these are very difficult discussions because you have to respond to your own constituencies who we use taxpayers' money to do this with. So this is not an easy question, but I would plead with them that this is about saving lives and livelihoods. It is what I heard from women and girls in Afghanistan while I was there. And so I think that it is incumbent on us not to leave them behind or to make them suffer any more than they are. In terms of how this messaging is communicated, you will see it from social media, but you'll also see it from the decree that is released, and it is from that we glean these messages. It is why we have proactively gone to the de facto authorities to get them to be clearer with what this means, and we are continuing to consult with them. In addition, continuing to consult with the neighborhood, because the neighborhood also have a role to play here. These are Muslim countries. They have interactions with the de facto authorities, and we are hoping that they will lend their voice and their muscle to make sure that this reverses the decisions that yet again have been taken to harm women and girls in Afghanistan.
And we had heard that there had been some kind of carve-outs made for, earlier for the ban on women working for aid groups, but, some could go back to work in certain health areas and education areas. Is there any concern that that might be walked back, and are you hoping to, get the same kind of carve-outs for the UN?
Well, I would say that nothing is, we never say never, given this is, another backward step, incredibly backward step from what has happened since the last bans. But we continue to engage and to consult and to work with the different states. There's more than one state within Afghanistan that we work with, and some are harsher than others. But I think by and large, we've been able to deliver. In this particular case, we hope that we can get it walked back, and that, if there are carve-outs, well, then we will work with them. But we take whatever we can and fight to regain women's rights in Afghanistan. Never hopeful, because they are so unpredictable. And 1 minute you think you are 2 steps ahead, and then you are 7 steps behind. But we're here to fight the good fight for the rights of women and girls in Afghanistan.
I think we have a question online. Abdel Hamid.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Secretary General. My name is Abdul Hamid Sayan from the Arabic daily Al-Quds Al-Arabi. Since you departed from the main issue about sustainable development and talked about solidarity with Afghan women, I'm encouraged also to depart with my question. And I ask you if you can address the issue of Palestinian women who last night at 11 p.m. in Al-Aqsa Mosque were stormed by Israeli security force out. 400 Palestinians were arrested, and many women were subject to a kind of violence by Israeli forces. Can you address that also?
Abdelhamid, we will have more on the situation in Jerusalem at the briefing in a short while. But we may have lost the connection with the DSG. I can't hear you.
Do I understand that the Deputy Secretary is apologizing or
No,
refusing to answer my question?
No. I think what we understand is that for some reason we've lost the connection before you started asking the question. So I think there's no link. But we'll see if she comes back on. In the meantime, we'll go to Deji from CCTV if you have a question on the report.
Yes. So first, apologies that I came this late, so I might miss a lot of things. We know that the SG said the Sustainable Development Goals actually is in danger. And today we're talking about the financing of the SDG. Can you tell us how to persuade people to invest something in danger? Because if we're taking it as a, if you see it's a bad business, you won't put money in there, right? So how can you persuade people to do that? Thank you.
Thank you so much. That's the point we have been making. The question we should ask ourselves: if you are in danger, why? Because we did not implement the SDGs at the pace that we're required to do after 2050. So SDGs gives you the best prevention and ability to weather such shocks that we are confronted with. So that's our message. If you come back and invest in the SDGs for immediate crises that you are facing, poverty, hunger, health challenges, but also with long-term in mind in education and human capital, and of course, infrastructure, you will be better as a society in terms of resilience and your ability to also remain on the path to sustainable development.
So do you think it's still a good business?
I have no doubt about it, because, and let me also give you good news. It's not, the report is not all about bad news, good news. Let me give you good news. $1.1 trillion have been invested in transition, in surpassing fossil fuel investments. And this is the first time that we are investing in sustainable transition. Second, every hour, 40,000 people have been using, additional people using internet, which is 338 million people between 21 and 2022. We have fifth largest industrial sector, green economy, $7.2 trillion. So there's good news also when you shift towards these investments, you see impact. Inclusion of people through internet is also a step forward. Digitalization, digital economy, these things are moving forward. So we have good news also in terms of countries who have invested in these areas and they're making progress and they're becoming relatively resilient. But the biggest challenge is the most vulnerable countries and the most vulnerable people who need support and who need access to concessional finance. That's the burden of our song.
Okay. Thank you. DSG, do you have any closing words?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that this report, for one, gives us great guidance to what we need to be looking for in building up the momentum towards our G20 meetings, but in particularly the SDG summit in September. We need to address debt. We need to look at liquidity. We need to find better resources at accessible rates to the developing world as we see in the developed. And this needs to go into the transitions that we need for the SDGs on energy, on food systems. And I hope that we will carry these messages to all the constituencies concerned and that they will lift.
Okay. Thank you very much, and we'll see you here back briefly for the regular briefing. Thank you.